News Tonight has assembled a special panel this evening to discuss the worsening migrant crisis. We're joined now live from Catania in Sicily by the Italian politician Ignazio Correia, who is a member of the European Parliament. Also joining us live from Los Angeles is Peter Herbert, the chair of the Society for Black Lawyers.
In the studio is Tesfalem Araya, an Eritrean refugee and co-founder of the Eritrean Movement for Democracy and Human Rights, Fiona Cunningham, a former special advisor to the Home Secretary, Theresa May, and last but not least, Lord West, a former Minister for Security and Counter-Terrorism.
Well, to you first, Ignazio Correia. You're on a fact-finding mission in Catania. What exactly have you seen so far?
First of all, good evening to everyone. We are here in the harbour of Catania and we're participating to an official mission from the European Parliament organised by the Committees of Budgets and LIBE, which is Liberties, Justice and Internal Affairs. We've been visiting the centres where migrants are coming and we'll be talking to the operator of the sectors. We know that we are having big tragedies here in the Mediterranean Sea, and we are trying to have a global approach, what we are calling an holistic approach as a European Parliament. As we are having an initiative report during these times, we organize this mixed delegation to try to understand better what are the basic problems that we are facing. And today, for example, we went to Pozzallo, which is one of the hot spots when migrants come. And we've been talking to many of them and try to understand what are they, where they want to go, what are the place, where is the place where they come from, and what is the travel that they do. And we heard about very tragic situation, very tragic travels. And for us, it's important to understand how these people live and what they're looking for to try to change the rules in a European level.
Do you have a better understanding now of what exactly needs to be done?
Wow, actually, we're facing always the same problems in a different level, because as a European Parliament, we're trying to have an approach which is mostly European. But when we're talking about internal affairs, we all know that the European treaties doesn't give us the powers to change the regulation. So we know, for example, that for having a common asylum seekers rules, we should change the Dublin system, the Dublin regulation. But we are facing the resistance from many of the states. The UK is one of the states that doesn't want to share the burdens of migrants. So this is one of the problems that we are working on as a European Parliament, which is part of the European institution. Talking about the Italian level, we're trying to face and to understand what happened with funds. That's why we came here with the Budget Committee, because we are spending a lot of money and there are a lot of people complaining about this big money that are spent on the migrants issue. And there are a lot of problems with corruption and with the organization of hospitality. And this was something that we were trying to focus with the operator here in Sicily.
OK, Ignazio, we know you have to leave us. Thanks very much for that. We'll come back to the studio and first of all speak to Tesfalem Araya. Now, you know, first-hand almost, a cousin of yours was subject to these people smugglers and sadly died last month trying to get to safety.
Yes, thank you for having me. My cousin and his wife, actually last year, end of June, tried to cross the Mediterranean, perished, and we haven't heard about the whereabouts and what happened to them. It was not reported. It was not the only boat that perished at that time. There were other boats also carrying a different number of people who, perished in the sea. So this affects us personally as Eritreans, but also what's happening in Eritrea, I think that should be the attention of the whole discussion, because there are things that are causing this scale of migration, especially from Eritrea. Of course, there are different patterns of migrations. You have other routes from West Africa, East Africa, which includes Eritrea as well. The major sending country in East Africa is Eritrea. You have also Syria. So in our case, there are factors that are pushing these young people to leave their country. One is the lack of rule of law in the country. As we speak today in Eritrea, I can paint a picture to you that the majority of the youth are in the military, doing indefinitely in the military. High school students, especially the last graders in the last few weeks, have been bussed into a military training. The rest of the high school students are doing forced labor after they finished in June their schooling. So it shows you just to paint a picture of what's happening, what is driving this youth to leave the country.
I think that helps to give us an understanding of why people are prepared to go through such a perilous journey in order to try to get to Europe. And our reporter, Lisa Holland, has been meeting some of those who have managed to survive that journey and made it to the UK.
سلم استحول لك قبل بقصان ده هرم بقى قالت تايبلو أو ده تايبلو كل نجار بقى قاسو سخا ما كل نجار حماي بقى أنا ليبيا أمارات السين كحت أطول بر حما بقى تدخل في أي وصي بقى سجاب كفتي نفتا بحر سقعت متي تدخل في أي ودلو تي ناي بحر عدري بقى أملاك أتوقع كي أتوقع ونخليني أملاكي زينغو إيه بتعم هرور نيرو واتسينا نفاس كورتي لنا مالتي شنت بيتي اللي ما يمحصابي له كل نجار حجي هرور كينو الناس واتسينا دق مالتي شو هاري مامون مالتي.
Well, that Eritrean young woman explaining that the thoughts of what she went through so difficult that she didn't actually want to remember. I mean, this is slave trafficking, isn't it? And you've had a lot to do with discussing and bringing to the fore modern-day slavery.
I mean, my recent report looked across EU member states, and I was quite interested by your Italian politician, because he's actually there at the moment with what he calls the LIBE committee, which is a European Commission committee, which actually has the ability right now to give police and law enforcement the tools to really crack down on the organised criminals behind this. It's something called passenger name records, and it's currently in logjam in the European Parliament, and frankly it needs to be passed immediately. At the moment it's seen through the prism of counter-terrorism, but it has to be extended to organised crime, because it's those kind of tools that law enforcement need to really crack down on those organised criminals.
And that is the thing, that it is organised crime. Lord Alan West, it's criminal activity where money is to be made. This type of activity will go ahead and people who are vulnerable will be taken advantage of.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a human tragedy, of course. I think, aren't we lucky in this country and in Europe that it's so nice living here and so horrible living in most of these other countries. I mean, it's ghastly in most of them, and you can understand why most people want to get out of them. But I do believe that the way we're operating in the Mediterranean at the moment actually encourages the people smugglers. I've got people who work for me who've been down in West Africa in the Sahel, and the fact that Bulwark and now Enterprise are used is being used by the people smugglers to say, don't worry, we'll get you across the Sahara, and they treat them appallingly, these people. It's ghastly in Libya. Get on the boat. Here's the phone number of the Italian Coast Guard. Once you get out of territorial waters, the Royal Navy will collect you, you'll get food, you'll be looked after, and you'll be taken to Europe. I don't think that's the basis on which our ships are meant to be being involved, not to encourage the people smugglers who are making millions out of this. And it is absolutely right, we come down on them hard and we track them down and see where their money's going. But I think we're doing this the wrong way. I think we should have a close blockade, and we should spend money on setting up, maybe in Tunisia or wherever, properly controlled camps run by NGOs where people are screened so the real refugees can be brought through into Europe, and we should take more. But the ones who are not aren't. And I think all we're doing is encouraging people to go into the sea. At the moment it's the summer, some will drown. In the winter, I can tell you, a lot will drown. The Mediterranean is a nasty sea, and we will be encouraging people to go out in that sea, and it's not a good idea.
And Peter Herbert, if I can just bring you in here. I mean, you're compiling a report that you're going to present to Theresa May, the Home Secretary, and the UNHCR. What do you make of this situation? There are no easy answers, are there?
Well, the answers are not, as your last speaker just suggested, having a blockade of the North African coast. That is an abdication of Britain's and the rest of the EU's international responsibility. The migrants are not setting out of their own volition from the Libyan coast, and anybody believes that, in a sense, the presence, in fact, the absence of the bullet, because she's been withdrawn now by the UK government, is an encouragement, is just a real misconception about the situation. The majority of migrants that we encountered and interviewed were actually people who were working in Libya. They were from Bengal, Syria, Mali, Eritrea, a whole range of countries, some of whom escaped persecution, some of whom are escaping poverty, but the majority of whom were exploited, imprisoned, raped, tortured by the militias in Libya, we think with the connivance of the two Libyan governments, House of Representatives and Libyan Dawn, and that this trade is actually done on a scale whereby anybody suggests that we come down hard on traffickers. No, you won't, because they're not actually in European territorial waters. They're sitting in Libya or in North Africa beyond your reach, and as the programme will show.
So
what we want to happen is, as Enzo Bianco suggested, well, there is a threefold approach. One, as Enzo Bianco, the mayor of Catania, suggested, a humanitarian corridor, fully funded by the EU to recognise our international obligations under the Geneva Convention. Secondly, that if there is to be any resettlement, it has to be done on a voluntary basis with the countries of the African Union, where that is possible, but with dignity and with economic betterment at its core. And thirdly, yes, there has to be a more proactive response to get at the traffickers, and if that means, in a sense, intervention of some extent and support for a good governance in Libya as opposed to the chaotic situation at the moment, that must happen. But to suggest simply we push people back from Europe is a complete abdication of our obligations under the Geneva Convention.
Lord West, what do you say to that?
Well,
they're saying that a blockade is not the answer.
You heard what I said. I believe that we should try and set up we should spend the money to do it, maybe in Tunis or wherever, so people can be properly screened and looked at, because the people who are making money sending them to Europe, no one's going to pay their $1,500 if they know jolly well they're not going to get to Europe. They just won't pay it.
And
therefore, I think that will stop it. Now, it is a humanitarian disaster. It is awful. But I think what we're doing is encouraging people to go out to sea. We're encouraging the people who are trafficking. And I don't think that's the good thing to do. And it sounds hard-hearted. And, we'd all like to be warm and cuddly. But actually, at the end of the day, that will encourage and make it worse. And we will end up with thousands dying in the winter. I've been in the Mediterranean.
But you're not negating
winter.
the fact that it is a perilous journey. And these people are not undertaking this.
It is a perilous journey. You can see from the number of people who are being rescued. And there are very strict rules about rescuing people at sea. There's a thing of safety of life at sea. There are strict rules about who you return these people to. There are strict IMO, International Maritime Organization, rules about this, and we need to apply those.
We'll be hearing more from our panel shortly after the break. You're watching Sky News Tonight.
Welcome back to our special panel discussion on the worsening migrant crisis. And before the break, we heard from Lord Wester talking about perhaps pushing some of these people back, although they're trying to get to what they consider to be safer climes. And Peter Herbert, you were listening to that in Los Angeles. What's your reaction?
Yes. Well, my reaction is quite shocked. I mean, if you have any knowledge of European law, the case of Hirsi Jama before the European Court ruled that so-called pushbacks are unlawful, contrary to international law, and as far as many are concerned, would amount to a crime against humanity. There is no provision to do what the Australians have done with migrants, to push them back and dump them in Papua New Guinea, and the thought that you can willfully dump people in Tunisia to be run by NGOs, to do, in a sense, the work that the British government and others has a duty to do, is clearly contrary, not only morally wrong, but contrary to international law. The starting point should be to have the United Kingdom step up to the mark, as with Ireland, Denmark. Those are, in a sense, the countries who oppose a cross-European solution, and take the migrants who are being properly assessed as asylum seekers. Britain has only promised to take 297 Syrians, the most vulnerable. Germany, 40,000. Even Australia, with its xenophobic policy, 5,000. So these are the countries, Britain, Ireland and Denmark, who must change their policy and do as the European Commission has asked. And as the Mayor of Catania said, this is no crisis that is an emergency. It was entirely predictable in October last year when the EU withdrew the funding for the Mare Nostrum, and all credit to the Italian armed forces and navy and Greeks and the Maltese, who have done a huge job on the southern borders of actually saving lives. And one wonders whether, if these were European migrants, they would be treated in the same way.
Well, Peter,
I doubt it.
If I can
Their
just
lives
stop
are
you
not
there, I'd like
expensive.
to bring in Fiona Cunningham to get your response to that. I mean, what would you say to that? Because the EU is planning to open migrant centres in Africa.
I mean, I think what I would say is that we actually are behind on our response to this problem by about a decade, and that's why we're all squabbling about what the right thing is to do. And by that I mean, for clarity's sake, we have to divide it all up into source country and transit country and destination country, and then work out what each and every response ought to be. So, for example, Peter's been talking about refugees and so forth. And of course, you know, there has to be international development and so forth, and education programmes in countries where, you know, people feel that their life is so awful they want to make this trip in the first place. And then I touched on what happens in transit. Well, that is a law enforcement response. And for a law enforcement response to be a good one, they all need to start taking it more seriously. For my report, I interviewed 28 different law enforcement countries. And they all said to me privately, because I did it off the record, they know this is happening, but their entire resource decision is built on how to deal with counter-narcotics, not counter-trafficking. So they themselves know that this is a problem, but all their resource decisions tend to be built around drug trafficking and not human trafficking, and that's where we are now behind on our response. So, for example, you know, in drug trafficking, people use intercept and covert surveillance. That's not happening for human traffickers, and that's why, as Lord West rightly said, traffickers are making so much money. They're like FTSE 100 companies. They're really organised. And we are not organised in the same way. They know how to use their networks. We don't know how to use our networks. You know, would a police officer in Leicestershire know how to pick up the phone to a police officer in Slovakia? My hunch is probably not. But they need to start getting like that.
Tess Philem, we seem to be, from what Fiona's saying, at a disadvantage in that striking against these people smugglers. But what I wanted to ask you is, what do we need to do to stop people wanting to risk their lives and pay these sums to come to a better life? What needs to happen in Eritrea?
Well, first let me just respond to the idea of creating camp in northern Africa and keep people and screen people from there. The international community, European countries have been tested. There are refugee camps in Sudan housing hundreds of, more than 100, about 200,000 actually, Eritrean refugees only. And their conditions are very bad there. So where is the help even for those who are in the camps already in Sudan? In Ethiopia, the same. There are more than 100,000 Eritrean refugees in very dire conditions. The international community have forgotten about this. Because their situation is deteriorating, their only resort is to move to Libya, and because there is this route.
But if I can point out one example, the French have claimed some successes in offering financial inducements to people to start up businesses in Cameroon, in countries where people can have a peaceful life. Perhaps that could work. I mean, linking development aid to people so they stay in their country of origin or in Africa.
True. I mean, the debate is like there are different, I said in the beginning, there are different patterns of the migration. The pattern of migration from West Africa is not the same as the one which is really in East Africa, especially in Eritrea. Yeah. You asked me about what is causing that. In Eritrea today, we have a country with no constitution, no parliament, no justice system, no newspapers, no civil society. You can see how closed society it is. And there is indefinite military conscription and forced labor. Basically, technically, everybody is in the army, indefinitely. Even if you go to school, to college, you have no hope and dream to realize your own dreams in the country. This is the problem for me.
Lord West, with what Tess Philem is saying, are you happy then to want to contain the problem in Africa, regardless of what the consequences might be for those people who might have a legitimate right to leave?
I think we would have to make sure that camps that we looked after with NGOs were sufficiently funded to look after that. I mean, the ones in southern Sudan, I agree, and the ones in Ethiopia are dreadful, but we haven't got at the moment we haven't got a responsibility for those except in the general sense of the world community. So I think we would have to look after the ones where we set up something to do this. But I do believe we need to stop the people who are the traffickers getting their $1,500 off each person. And if those people know they're not going to get to Europe, then I think they won't get their $1,500. And we absolutely need to, as was said, we've absolutely got to get in amongst them. We've got to really get in amongst where their money's going. You've got to strip the money out of them, find out who they are. And although Libya is a complete basket case, we can still do a lot of that if we put the focus on it, if we do exactly what was said, by coordinate and work out how we're doing it. And I think that's far better than letting these people go into the Mediterranean, because I tell you, in the winter, thousands will die if they're coming at this pace. I mean, it is a different sea then, even with the number of ships we've got. And talking about international law, as our friend in America was saying, as a captain of a ship, the safety of lives at sea legislation quite clearly says when you come across a ship that is sinking with these people on, you take it back to its flag state.
Lord
it
West,
quite clearly says that by law.
Thank you very much. We've run out of time. Lord West, Tess, Philem and Fiona, thank you very much. And sadly, we've lost Peter Herbert in LA. But thank you all for taking part in this discussion on the migrant crisis.